How does magic work? Spoiler alert, I have no idea.
Okay, first off, I don't really love the term magic. I'd prefer not to use it, but if I start to get creative with synonyms just to personally avoid using the word magic, it gets a lot harder for all of us to start on the same page of understanding with some preliminary assumptions. So for the purposes of this video, I'll use the term magic. So to me, magic is a blanket term that covers a bunch of different energetic or alchemical processes. There isn't just one single way that so-called magic works, kind of like there isn't one single theorem or scientific law that covers all within the body of, say, physics or chemistry. There's many different theorems, principles, laws, and formulas at play to consider that could be possible for physics or for chemistry to work. So when we're talking about magic, there isn't this one single formula or explanation for magic. There are specific methodologies of magic, for instance, and what theorems I propose as ruling over one set of methodologies in magic aren't the same theorems and formulas that would rule over a totally different methodology of magic. Sure, some parts of magic can be explained away by psychology because I believe so much of the conditions we experience are either neurological or psychological and can be addressed by understanding brain functions. Certain methodologies in magic can be used to produce the placebo effect and does so in a very effective manner, that it does resolve certain problems or human conditions we face that modern science hasn't been able to solve. Chronic pain as a health issue, for example, is just one of those areas that I think modern medical science has not been that great at resolving or even diagnosing, whereas forms of healing magic seem to be weirdly better and slightly more effective at addressing chronic pain.
When I think about the zeroth law of thermodynamics, I can't help wondering whether it can be instructive as well on how the energy we manipulate in spellcrafting or magic might work. If you ask me, this makes a whole lot more sense than the so-called law of attraction. So under the zeroth law, if system A is in thermal equilibrium with system C and system B is also in thermal equilibrium with system C, then systems A and B are in equilibrium with each other, along with being in equilibrium with C. Simple enough for us to understand, right? Since it follows logically, and not only logically, but intuitively.
That means as a practitioner, if I can get a system A in equilibrium or some sort of resonant state with a third-party system, then get system B also in equilibrium or resonance with that third-party system as a frame of reference, in taking these two actions, A and B will strike in equilibrium or a form of harmonic resonance. Isn't that kind of cool? Okay, well, it makes sense to me. For me, I see that third-party system C could be me in a particular heightened state, or it could be some form of divine consciousness energy petitioning a deity, and whether a practitioner is conscious of the science or not, I have to imagine that any mode of invocation or evocation would require some intuitive adherence to this principle. My hypothesis is there is some sort of metaphysical equivalent to Zeroth that can explain the energy transfers taking place in craft work, and instead of gauging temperature here as you would do in thermodynamics, you're gauging some form of wave or particle wave function, some other energy that's present. Shen, maybe, or at least that's what we call it in Chinese metaphysics. Shen.
I also think about the separate yet related principles that govern thermodynamics and kinetics. So I've always hypothesized that there must be some relationship between what we understand about thermodynamics and an energy flow akin to karma, without any use of magic, just submitting to the natural flow of karma. What you put out as a reactant will come back to you a product. Now, magic then is kinetic, where the rate constants of a reversible reaction aren't at equilibrium. Here, we're getting a bit into the Arrhenius equation, helping us to make sense of the relationship between rate of chemical reactions and energy. I wonder if chemical kinetics can help explain alchemical kinetics, or, well, magic. Reactants, FYI, are like the separate ingredients that go into a spell, or the essential ingredients that you'll be cooking with.
So, flour, cornstarch, baking powder, baking soda, salt, brown sugar, white sugar, eggs, vanilla, and chocolate chips, and the exact amount of each are the reactants.
The product after the chemical reaction will be, fair warning, I'm going to brag here, the best chocolate chip cookies you've ever had. So anyway, I do believe that magic follows an equivalent body of laws and principles as we know them in thermodynamics and kinetics. Can collision theory and statistical mechanics, as we see it in formulas like the Arrhenius Equation, someday explain magic? I haven't a clue, but I'd like to believe so. Sidebar, who else used to doodle along the margins while you took notes in science class?
Arrhenius, by the way, fun fact, was a Nobel Prize winning Swedish physicist who was around Arthur Edward Waite's age. Waite, of course, being a Golden Dawn mystic and the renowned tarotist behind the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck. No relationship between the two other than both of these figures doing their thing in the same era, expressive of a, I think, collective consciousness going on during this time. I think it's kind of cool that Arrhenius was gaining attention for his scientific advancements, formulas that I'm seeing as great starting points for explaining how magic and craft works. Around the same time, you've got these pretty strong Golden Dawn and theosophical mysticisms going on. So I just think it's really cool and, again, totally unrelated and uninteresting unless you're also a tarot enthusiast like me, in which case you're probably geeking out right about now.
Lately, I've also been geeking out over Bell's theorem. That's right, my very own theoretical principle in the realm of quantum mechanics. Kidding, I didn't come up with Bell's theorem. It's really a thing. Let's talk about it. Bell's theorem, credit to John Stuart Bell, not Bell, is what we call a no-go theorem. Okay, we need to branch off on a tangent to address no-go theorems before we can circle back to Bell.
A no-go theorem is a principle that hypothesizes about a physical state or an energetic action that is considered impossible. It's an idea found in theoretical physics. A no-go theorem is a theorem that states a particular situation as we've calculated or perceived it is in fact physically and materially not possible. So you cannot do X by an argument of Y. It's an unconstructable. Unconstructables are an example of a no-go.
An angle trisection in geometry is a no-go or an unconstructable. Take any angle in geometry. As the theorem goes, it is an impossibility to use a compass and a straight edge only to trisect an angle. You can bisect an angle, sure, but you can't construct trisection with just these two tools. An angle trisection is therefore, under this theory, an unconstructable, a no-go.
Oracle results in computational theory is another example of a no-go.
Okay, now back to Bell's theorem. The theory states that no physical theory of local hidden variables can ever reproduce all of the predictions of quantum mechanics.
A local hidden variable is the state of a physical system where its physical state, as you formulated it, does not give you a complete description of the system. Certain measurements of that physical system are therefore indeterminable or non-determinable. You can't calculate or predict an outcome with measurable certainty. You can only indicate probabilities. So I think much in the realm of occult or esoteric energy work, metaphysical craft, to be a system or quantum state that we might begin to understand through the hidden variable theory and thus by extension Bell's theorem. Maybe we can explain certain modalities of spellcrafting with collision theory and statistical mechanics. I don't know. I'm just an Asian chick with a YouTube channel who likes to talk a lot about stuff she knows very little about. I don't want to declare with any certainty absolute connections, of course, between quantum systems and magic, and I often believe that people who do declare absolute connections between the two, that one can definitely explain the other or vice versa, either don't know enough about quantum physics or don't know enough about the nuances of magic. So let's all just acknowledge we just have way more questions than we do answers at this point, and what we're doing right now is only looking at hypotheses. That's it. I'm looking for patterns at the fringes of ideas and seeing if any of these puzzle pieces will fit together. That's all I'm doing. I think there has to be something to the uncertainty principle.
Or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which might be able to explain magic as we define magic to still be a form of science, to still follow set formulas, and yet be that paradox of being both formulaic and unpredictable.
Initially, Heisenberg figured the uncertainty principle or unpredictability of result is due to the measuring phenomenon. The very act of trying to measure a wave particle is the wildcard factor that renders the situation unpredictable. However, now scientists are saying, wait, not so fast. It's even deeper than that. Something in the wave particle itself, by its very nature, renders it unpredictable, period. So to me, this reminds me of how we frame and talk about magic or spellcrafting. We all acknowledge there's an inherent uncertainty principle or unpredictability to spellcrafting, right? The funny thing is, often skeptics will take this very state of magic and spellcrafting as unequivocal proof that it's not real. Since magic cannot be predictable even after observing both scientific rigor and a set formula, it's not real. But the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics does suggest that you could, in theory, be both scientific and formulaic, but still yield an unpredictable or uncertain result. Meaning, something about the wave particle that spellcrafting is being worked on is inherently uncertain. So the result, no matter how methodical, scientific, or formulaic your process is, will be by principle uncertain and unpredictable. But that doesn't mean it's not real, and that uncertainty principle inherent in craft doesn't necessarily mean it's unscientific. It just means we're applying the wrong methodology of science to analyze the situation. Under a more sophisticated methodology of science, one we haven't yet figured out, something like magic and spellcrafting could be explained, and it's more than just psychology or the placebo effect. Physiological, materialist, and objective, measurable changes in the physical world can be created through this modality that we call magic. I don't know, all of this kind of makes my brain hurt, but hurt in a really good way, so that's why we're talking about it as a Bell Chimes In episode. This is nothing more than me hypothesizing and talking out loud about patterns that intrigue me and things that I really know nothing about. One point that's pretty clear in my mind, but now thinking back on what I've said up to this point, I'm a bit afraid that I haven't actually been as clear about it in my chat with you. All of this speculation and attempts at correlating science and magic is not so much about explaining how magic works, but for me, it's powerfully instructive on how complicated magic actually is. So for me, by framing magic within the constructs of science, I'm compelling myself to be precise, to be deliberate, to be thoughtful and scrutinizing, and to exercise objectivity when I practice the craft. So it's far less about the Arrhenius Equation, Bell's theorem, thermodynamics, or kinetics, and how these various theorems might explain magic. And it's a lot more about how do I conform my craft to scientific theorems. Here's how I define magic, a word, by the way, I mentioned I dislike using. Magic is creating or manipulating a change of state, whether that's a change in physical state or the change of an emotional, astral, or non-physical state that currently accepted scientific maxims and laws cannot seem to explain. So maybe under this construct, you could argue that feng shui is a type of magic, but is a type of magic that is based on resonance theory, harmonic states, and magnetism. That's an entirely different type of magic from, say, creating a spell oil, candle magic, or crafting puppets. You could maybe argue that divination is a form of magic under such a broad definition of magic, but the particular types of magic at play, the specific set of theorems that would be governing how divination works, for instance, differ from the set of theorems and maxims that might explain summonings or necromancy. So I wouldn't be so fast to say, okay, here are the top 10 or top 5 basic rules or theories that all magic must follow because magic is a science. Thinking that way takes you farther away from scientific integrity, in my opinion. How the major forms of magic that's most popular among occultists' work are based either on the science of the brain and how our brain functions, or on quantum mechanics. And both of these areas of science are still considered new frontier, even in the scientific community. So going out to both scientists and occultists alike, neither should act like we have all the answers already. How does magic work? As of this recording, we have to say we don't have the foggiest idea. Does magic work? How about that question? Magic is a specialized science. It's not 7th grade chemistry or psychology 101. It's a craft that most advanced occultists will still struggle to get right. I don't think of it as religion. I think there's something undeniably powerful about certain religious experiences that arise to the level of magic. And so then we're making this false equivalency between religion and magic. Religious experiences, the psychology of religious experiences, and maybe even the quantum states created by the energies at play during a religious experience all produce a magical result or miracle work. Miracle working, I believe, is a methodical, formulaic methodology of spellcrafting. It's magic, where the methodology and formulas for these particular quantum states are still a mystery to us. Since it's a mystery of known science, it's a miracle, or it's a religious experience. I mean, it's the 21st century, if you think about it, and a significant chunk of the world population still attributes earthquakes, hurricanes, and other natural disasters that earth scientists have already figured out, but a lot of people still attribute it to, like, karma and God. So we have a lot of catching up to do. I think that if magic and everything that falls under this umbrella of magic was total bullshit, then we wouldn't be having these heated debates and controversies over the veracity of magic. I think the obsession on both sides, the obsessiveness of occultists to prove magic is a science, and the obsessiveness of skeptics and atheists to debunk magic as a science, speaks louder and is more revealing of underlying truths than what either side of that debate is actually saying. Wherever there is a fissure in ideologies, when there is a controversy, there is an opportunity for truth to be revealed. And if human history can be used to predict cycles and trends, then the trend here is toward both sides being partially right and partially wrong. Does magic work? How does magic work? We could sit here and talk about Newton's law of universal gravitation, but if you've never experienced gravity or centripetal force or threw a ball up in the air in different ways using different levels of force, then stepped back to watch what happens, then a theoretical conversation about classical mechanics is not immediately productive to your way of life. I think classical mechanics has to be experiential for it to hold any meaning to you, for your curiosity to be piqued about how exactly gravity works, or why the ball does what it does when you throw it up a certain way or throw it across a football field. And even after experiencing classical mechanics, the vast majority of people still have zero interest in learning about how or why something works. Scientists and occultists, believe it or not, have so much more in common than either side realizes. No one from the mainstream public gives a shit about what either of them do. Most athletes know what they need to do mechanically for optimal, consistent, successful performance of their sport, but probably know next to nothing about classical mechanics. Most cooks develop a keen intuition for how to produce incredible tasting meals, how to get that chicken perfectly tender every single time, exactly how long the potatoes need to be in the oven, but it's not like they're figuring all of that out by running calculations through tried and true formulas of chemistry. So through experience, I would say I've honed a pretty reliable sense of whether I want to be baking, broiling, braising, poaching, or frying my fish for a specifically desired taste or flavor that day. But I couldn't for the life of me explain to you the thermodynamic principles at play. The distinction here is science as we know it has progressed to the point where scientists can explain how cooking works. But science has not progressed to the point yet where we can explain how magic works. The occultist is like the cook who just has a keen sense of intuition and also experience to guide successful craft or the preparation of a tasty meal. But generally speaking, I think both the occultist and the cook would have a tough time explaining to you the science behind what they do. So in the same way, when I get asked how I got that chicken dish to be so moist and tender, of course, the most reliable way for me to make sure you replicate the same results that I got would be to delve into the science of thermodynamics, which home cooks almost never do. Am I right? Instead, what you get is, oh, I first toss in a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then if you ask how I fry it, I'll be like, oh, I definitely use vegetable shortening, not any other kind of fat or oil. You have to use the shortening. And if you ask me why, I'm going to be like, oh, no, I just do. I mean, like, timing, ballpark 5 minutes. I'm not sitting here doing some, complicated formula or a calculation to tell you about timing. It's just a little bit of intuition and it's a little bit of experience. And so what ends up happening, as everybody who's ever cooked knows, is I give you this, shoddy recipe, even though the way I made it may have been great, but because of the way I've explained it to you, when you try to replicate that chicken dish at home, you might not get the same result because, again, we didn't get into the specific science of it. Had we gotten into the science of it, then it would have been a perfect replication of the dish that I had made at my home. So I think that's a great analogy for occultists, and why a lot of the times, something gets lost in translation between how I've prepared the meal at home, or done a particular spell, for myself. And then I go, oh, you want that spell? Let me give you the recipe or the instructions to that spell. And you're like, oh, okay, follow it. But then, I don't always give these specifics. Just like when I cook, I go, oh, just a pinch of that. You're like, what's a pinch? I'm like, I don't know, a pinch. So it's kind of the same way. And that's great and all, but I think because of the tenuous status of a lot of craft, it does help and benefit our field to really learn to be more precise and to really start thinking about it in a more scientific manner. I think that at this point, it is important for us to do that. The tough part about achieving that, though, is unlike cooking, where we have a pretty good grasp of thermodynamics and chemistry, the sciences involved in understanding magic, again, I believe, the quantum states, quantum mechanics, maybe not, right? Neurology and also psychology. I mean, psychology even is still an area of study we don't really know a lot about. The brain is something that is still, our own human brain is still such a mystery to us. So it is really hard to use science because we don't have the scientific knowledge at this point or the advancement at this point to explain craft. So it's kind of, the two kind of have to evolve and self-create in a sense. However, I'm optimistic that someday in the future we'll figure it out and the occultists, not the skeptics, are the ones who are going to get the last laugh.
Bell Chimes In is a video series on my channel where I chime in about a topic oft talked about, a subject matter that's been making its rounds in circuits of discussion, and I give my opinion, my thoughts, and my perspective. After you've seen the video, I'd love to have you chime in as well to share your opinion, thoughts, and perspective. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a totally different experience? You add value when you're part of the discourse. Talk to me, talk to each other. When we're talking, we're acknowledging. And isn't that such an important first step?